I would like to, before we get started, give my appreciation to Marilyn Grubb for the photo that I have on the front screen today. That is a photo contest winner from the Rotor magazine photo contest. It was the selected winner in the category for people in their helicopters. And she shot this on an anniversary flight that she and her husband made through British Columbia, I believe. Today's topic is a rotor review and forecast. This has been a very interesting year. Last year was a very interesting year, and these first 2 weeks of January have been another interesting year as well. And so we'd like to talk with some aviation media people who have a really great viewpoint of the entire industry. So we're looking forward to that. Our speakers today will be Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI International. Ken Swartz, who is the senior editor of Vertiflite magazine, the Vertical Flight Society. He has also worked on a couple of other publications, including Vertical and Helicopter International, I believe. I think I just blew that one horribly, Ken. Sorry about that. Dan Parsons, who's editor of Valor magazine. Dan's been around the industry quite a while. And of course, Mark Huber, who I just blew his title today too. It's been a busy day. Mark is a writer for Aviation International News. Aviation International News produces the show daily for us at Helicopters HAI Heli Expo. We do encourage you to ask questions during our webinars. We will try to get to the audience questions at the end of the webinar. You do have a question module in your command or control panel on the side of your screen. Just open that up, type in your question, and we will respond when we can. This video is being recorded. Webinar is being recorded. You should be able to receive a link after the fact, usually within about 24 hours. You can share that video with others. It'll also be on our YouTube channel. I'd now like to introduce Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI, to join us.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to have everybody here with us today. As we roll into 2021, the past year has been very challenging on many fronts, politically for some nations here in the United States, and then medically for many others. And as a result of the medical issues with the pandemic and all, financially stressful for millions. It's also created pressures and opportunities that most of us have never seen. Many of those same things can be said about this year too, and we're only 14 days into it. Now, speaking of the changes and the flexibility that the helicopter and the vertical flight community can do, it's one of the things we're trying to do as we release more information today, continuing to move forward with HAI Heli Expo. I know this is a tough time for issues, as many as we have to address, but I hope the information that we release today will help make your decision to participate easier. The work that's going in to mitigate the risk that are out there are extensive. Just as in every aviation type of activity, anytime and with all the risks that are associated with having an event like this, and we have done step-by-step mitigation on each of those risks that are identified. We're working in partnership with the government agencies, the health organizations, and the businesses that all play an important role with this show and with the show being done safely. The information we released today includes information from all of those partners, and there'll be continuing information coming out at least weekly that updates it on exactly where we are with anything additional. And if you think that we've missed something, by all means, you can drop me a note at president@rotor.org and let us know of your concerns or what's particularly keeping you from attending the event this year, and we'll try to address that. So I hope what we released today and some of the stuff that's on our website, if you haven't seen it in the press release today, please visit the health and safety section of HAI Heli Expo website, and that information will be posted there. As we prepared for this week's webinar, we discussed bringing in representatives from a couple of rotorcraft businesses, but thought maybe their viewpoint might be a little bit too narrow. So we decided on a group of panelists who generally have both an eye for detail and a great view of the overall industry, the aviation media. Today we brought in Ken, Mark, and Dan members of the press to talk about the year we've just finished and the one we're facing. How did manufacturers, governments, operators, and downstream customers deal with those pressures and opportunities? I mean, there are a lot of people that hopefully we'll hear from today that had opportunities in 2020 that weren't presented before. And then how might our industry deal with them in 2021? We've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right in and invite Ken, Mark, and Dan to turn on their cameras and join me here. All right. So we'll start with a softball out there. How about what are 3 things that stood out for you in our industry last year? Now let's go ahead and start with Ken.
Okay. I guess the first thing is the downturn. The fact that this downturn was not like other downturns that we've seen in the helicopter, the aviation industry, driven by economics or high fuel prices, but this was a downturn of a lot of different dimensions, and it went right across the aviation industry, and everyone caught up in it. Airlines, business aviation, helicopters, airport, and the kind of downturn we saw within helicopter industry was very different from before. Anyone related to tourism or moving people was hit very hard. You think about Las Vegas. The offshore oil industry was already consolidating, so in some ways maybe they were ahead of the game. Fires flared up in the US, but were very bad in Canada. So that was the first thing, that it was very different in terms of a downturn. The second thing is, I guess, the agility of the industry to adapt. I think helicopter industry historically is used to big cycle changes. It hasn't always been on the steady upward trajectory. So I think there's some very agile operators out there who hunkered down, stopped spending. And the third thing that I guess stood out for me was in fact the merger of Bristow and ERA, in terms of consolidation of some of the largest players in the US industry and global in terms of offshore.
Well, that's good. That's I certainly, and then I guess going into, well, let's go ahead and just move on to Dan. Dan, you got anything to add there? Was there others that maybe Ken didn't include?
Sure. I mean, obviously, no discussion of 2020 is complete without the impacts that COVID has had on the industry. And he mentioned that it's sort of rippled through the entire industry and has had some pretty dire effects. But I'd add to that the helicopter EMS and aeromedical sector has really proven its efficacy and its ability to adapt quickly. When this pandemic first started, we were talking to a lot of operators who are struggling with how to keep crews safe, how to turn flights when you have potential patients in the back. And the OEMs work very closely with the operators to get some approvals for various barriers between the cockpit and the back of the helicopter, and they adapted very quickly to be able to use the versatility of helicopters in running to this crisis, which I think really speaks to the value of vertical lift, especially in aeromedical. So I think other than that, I would just say that I think the OEMs also have done a good job with, there have been very few production and supply chain disruptions on the military side as well. But I mean, the production of aircraft has really kept a pace, and the OEMs, I think, have done a good job not only keeping their production lines open, but keeping their employees safe. And that's I think we should give them props for that.
No, absolutely. As you talked about the production lines, and that's one of the conversations that I've had with the OEMs, and did have the privilege of getting up to Philadelphia to Leonardo, and heard that exactly, that they were able to protect their employees. Number one priority is keeping their employees safe, but they were able to keep the lines moving as well. And so while I haven't been able to get out to the other OEMs, I'm still looking for the opportunity, hopefully in 2021, as this pandemic drops away a little bit. How about Mark? Anything for 2020?
Yeah, most of it obviously is bad news that most of us are familiar with. There was a significant reduction in overall flight hours with the exception of fire. Then EMS is coming back later in the year. There was a virtual collapse of the used helicopter market for a couple of quarters that was called the worst in 40 years. There was a significant reduction in output from the OEMs. Q3 to Q3 comparisons between 19 and 20, you saw overall units plunge from 564 down to around 426. And considering that during that same time metric in 17 for the first 3 quarters, it was right around 651 units. So yes, they've kept their employees safe. They've kept production lines open, spares open, but the output levels have dropped substantially. And there's every reason to believe that they're still going to be depressed going into the new year. The deliveries probably would have been far worse if it weren't for the loyalty and robustness of their parapublic customers. But that now is coming into some distress because of reduced revenues due to COVID-19. There's probably going to be about a $500 billion shortfall in state and local government budgets over the coming fiscal cycle. And the social pressures on police departments with the defund police campaigns are already taking their toll in certain flight departments from New York to Los Angeles. So all in all, there have been better years. Anything with a rotor on it is low-hanging fruit for the municipal budget cutters at this point. And it's important for those units to justify themselves in the public sector going forward.
No, thanks. So on the, with the last year being as bad, I know that everybody, here today, we're all an aviation enthusiasts, but was it, when it relates to some of the depression that went on across other industries, are we down, 50%, or do you think we just, if you tried to put everything in a bucket and said how much did the pandemic affect, could you put a number on it?
Between 20 and 30% probably overall, which considering what people had to deal with isn't necessarily bad. I mean, it's not great, obviously, but that's a big hit.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about the 3 things that are look forward to in this next upcoming year. We'll start with Dan.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we don't really understand where we are in this pandemic. I mean, I think looking forward to, the hope would be that, the vaccine rolls out in various places such that sectors like tourism can get on their feet. Obviously that remains to be seen, but certain of these companies just aren't, I think, going to be able to absorb another year like 2020. I mean, Sundance Helicopters, the loss of Sundance, which was a huge blow to the industry. I think we might see more of that in the future if this continues. But so I guess the thing to look to is that enough people get the vaccine that the non-critical sectors of the industry are able to bounce back. There are a lot of cool technological things coming in 2021. We've got some certifications that we're looking for, the AW609, Bell 525. There's a bunch of cool stuff on the military side that I won't bother you with, but the technology of the industry is pushing forward, because I think that's something that just can't remain stagnant, and Evol and urban air mobility is another part of that I think we're going to talk about later. But as far as the state of the art of flight, I think we're still, pressing forward and upward, which is exciting for 2021.
So, I mean, here in the U.S., we have a pretty good infrastructure, but have any of you heard of, where the helicopters and vertical flight aircraft are doing a good job moving some of the vaccines in other countries that are challenged by some of the infrastructure? Not yet. So, I mean, that's one of the challenges I heard, talking to some of our international partners, is that they're trying to make sure that the CAAs out there are ready to help, and that the helicopter community can help, move some of that, especially the ones that must still stay at that such super cold temperatures that need the dry ice. And so I know that just if there's people out there that are listening today, if it's something that business opportunities you think you can help with around the world, HEI can help link you up with some people over in Europe that have some processes in place so that we can see what we can do to help society there. Over the mark for good things this year.
Oh, well, things to look forward to. I didn't necessarily know they necessarily had to be good things. Bottom line is we're looking at a pretty rocky year. There's going to be more turbulence for offshore and for EMS due to both economics, politics, and global economic demand. The good news for offshore is we've seen some upward movement in the rig count in select markets, especially in Africa. That's good news, but there's still oversupply, and there are some actors in the market, I'm not going to mention any names, who are bidding contracts below cost, and that's having a negative impact on the market as a whole. The air ambulance market has some structural problems that are not going to go away, even with the new legislation that was just passed. You've got 70% of your client base riding in the back, whose benefits are being paid by Medicare and Medicaid, and that's below the cost of the service. That's not going to change with the new Congress. The no surprise billing provisions of the omnibus budget bill that was just passed into law, it takes the patient out of the payment loop, and that's good, but it also gives insurers an institutional window of 150 days to delay payments to the air ambulance providers, and they're probably all going to take advantage of that. That's not great. And 3 of the largest private insurers still are not negotiating in-network rates with the helicopter ambulance services. Air ambulance programs themselves are moving to larger helicopters. That trend's going to continue in 21. In my neck of the woods, just over the last 20 years, one of the biggest hospital-based programs has moved from AW109s to EC135s to EC145s. And that's a direct result of basically the continued deterioration of rural medical care, but also because of the pandemic, we're starting to transport more people in adult-size isolettes, and that just requires a larger type helicopter. So you're going to see a continued movement to larger helicopters in the EMS space. We're probably going to see a more aggressive regulatory environment on Capitol Hill. The Senate Majority Leader is a longtime industry critic with both his activity on the North Shore route in New York and air tourism and some other things. And we don't know exactly where the new Transportation Secretary designee is going to weigh in on this. He is a young man with larger political ambitions, and that is always a recipe for some kind of increased government activity. And there's a continued overhang from the 737 MAX situation, which makes regulators nervous, and that nervousness is probably not going to go away in 21. If you look at the omnibus budget and COVID relief bill that was just passed, there are hundreds and hundreds of pages about proper aircraft certification. And Congress seems to be injecting itself more and more into the aircraft certification business. And that also reflects a trend of increasing regulation. And, finally, there's probably going to be increased pressure for more taxes and fees. I know a lot of members are small businesses, they're LLCs or sub-S corporations. Any kind of a tax bill may have a negative impact on those folks going forward. But other than that, I think it's going to be a great year, really. No problems.
Well, that was quite the laundry list of, and I think you may have kind of referred to, that's not just next year, but that's the future. Those are a lot of changes that are coming, a lot of instability of new things that are happening. And again, hopefully with the the flexibility of the helicopter community and the vertical flight, that we can adapt and make sure that they turn into as positive as possible. But yeah, absolutely a bunch of challenges there. But how about Ken?
Okay. Like Mark said, looking to this year, there's some positive and there's also some negative. The thing that concerns me is that the civil aircraft deliveries in 2020 are probably at the lowest level since 2001. And the revenues are significantly lower because the product mix includes less heavy and medium aircraft than in prior years. And we've seen a steady decline in civil aircraft OEM revenues as well as production rates. So the concern I have is there are orders on the books, but there's also a new glut of used aircraft, and in some cases low time used aircraft. Plus, with the utilization rates quite low, the consumables like spare parts, that demand may be down. So the concern from the OEM side of things is both the revenue from new sales, but the part sales. And so how is this going to impact the OEMs longer term? One, can they afford to invest in new product development beyond what's currently on the books? Two, what's going to happen to spare parts prices, right? And then three, with the smaller OEMs that are not diversified heavily into the military market, what's their staying power? Could this be a setup for further industry consolidation, or basically raising the barriers to entry so that we'll have fewer helicopter models to choose from going on in the future? The second thing I look at, certainly here in Canada, is it's a utility market and it's often been a used market. And when downturns occur and pricing changes occur, it allows certain aircraft types to migrate from one sector like corporate into utility, or from offshore into utility. So the question is, as the prices drop, are we going to see short nose 139s in the utility market? Are we going to see more like twins coming out of offshore or something and migrating into the utility market? In the US, the utility market has a different dynamic because you do have the exclusive use aircraft, which you don't have in most other sectors of the world. And the exclusive use aircraft, in a sense, gives you a price point below the certified aircraft. So the utility market, there's some dynamics. Also, when a big market like fires, it's feast or famine if you're on exclusive use, or call when needed. The third thing I would say, and I'm certainly look forward to, is the continued maturation of the Evital market. And I know we're going to discuss that a little bit later, but I've been following this for about 4 years, and it went from, what the hell are you talking about, to this is fantasy land. And I think that there's been a change in perception, largely as the industry has articulated the value proposition of lower operating costs and reduced noise and emissions. And so the lower operating costs appeals to the customer, and the lower noise and emissions appeals to the community. And so the combination of the two, I think that the overall VTOL market is poised for major expansion as the prices come down.
All right, thanks for that, Ken. I think those were all certainly the three of you covered a lot of changes coming in the future. Adaptability will be key to a lot of that stuff, and we'll move on to the next one, which is the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team just announced that helicopter accidents last year were down 22% from previous year, and that fatal accidents were down 36% from the year before. What are your thoughts on the reason for this decline? Is the industry doing a better job of approaching safety holistically with training, culture, technologies, and what can we continue to do better? I know that's kind of a three-part question, and we'll start with Mark.
Obviously, if you're not flying as much, the risk of accidents is lower. I think the data from this year is kind of an anomaly. Let's see what it looks like next year as far as seeing any kind of meaningful trend in the data stats. As far as what we could do better, it all comes down to culture. Culture is everything in a safe organization. Everyone has to have an SMS, and if your insurer doesn't make you get one, Congress is going to make you get one. It's only a matter of time. It basically starts with culture. It's all about the culture.
Well put. Dan, you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think Mark nailed it. I mean, a massive decline in flight hours across all sectors, equals fewer opportunities for an accident. There might be lessons learned out of the decline in flight hours. I mean, obviously the critical sectors were flying more than other sectors. So once with the data and can actually see what happened last year and the causality, then there might be lessons to be gleaned. But mainly, and I think still just the push for the installation of new technologies, SMSs, HTOLs, ADS-B out, all these things, will get us closer to that goal zero, but it really will come down to culture, making sure that the pilots and operators have safety at the front of mind at all times, I think.
Ken, anything you want to add?
I would say that, as the pandemic came on and the industry started to turn, I think that companies became more mindful of managing risk. You also may have seen attrition at the lower end, the less experienced crews. So you have more experienced people moving back into the cockpits or becoming hands-on as the labor force shrinks. And also, when companies are in high growth, you might also have a frenzy of activity. With less activity, you're paying more attention to your customer and to the mission.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, my thought is just how many people took the additional downtime away from flying to do some studying and do some simulator work, and that certainly was the purpose of us starting some of these webinars. So hopefully the individual responsibility of some of the pilots have also tried to sharpen their skills. All right, I think all of you had mentioned it, that we're going to get to this area. So there had been a lot of coverage on new technologies, advanced air mobility, or urban air mobility, as we transition, what name we're going to use there, and how quickly the FAA and other international agencies can certify these aircraft, future aircraft, with flight for passengers. So give me your thought on how quickly you think the public will accept these aircraft as safe modes of transportation. And we'll kick off with Dan.
So I think, as Ken mentioned earlier, this sort of started out in the realm of fantasy land and, big tech sci-fi, but it really has, as more and more investment has come, now it's in the billions of dollars has come into this sector, and more other industries have adopted the sort of concept of advanced urban air mobility. You have a lot of the automotive manufacturers buying into it now, making major investments aside from just the traditional aviation OEMs. I think public perception and public adoption of these modes of transportation is going to be a major hurdle, obviously, and certification and the safety systems that go into these aircraft is going to be paramount to that. But I think as the industry, as these tech companies join forces with larger, more media sort of public relations savvy industries and get the message out that these technologies have great value and can be certified and operated, I think there's an incremental path to this becoming a major transportation modality, I guess, in the United States and elsewhere. We're seeing it a little bit. It sort of bleeds in and out of the relationship that people have with drones and their skepticism about, new looking things flying over their heads. But there's been a lot of progress made on that side of things, and now we're seeing drones sort of being used for, you know, told number of applications in our everyday lives, to include delivering packages. So there's a pathway. I think the folks that are trying to implement this concept have to, you know, understand that public skepticism, and then very deliberately combat it, because there is great value in the technology. As Ken said, there's, you know, reduced operating cost and reduced emissions. So the efficacy of a helicopter, but with much, much wider application for moving people and cargo in complex environments, which is what vertical lift is all about.
Well put. Well put. Ken, over to you.
If we look at, you know, the industry, you know, going back years, you know, this thing is this sort of a technological convergence, and it was the early players were outside, in a sense, the traditional aerospace industry. They were coming in from other sectors, and the financing was also coming from non-aviation sources. I think that there's an appreciation that the technology will advance, that distributed electric propulsion will be safe, that safety is being addressed in many ways. I think the bigger challenge is the business model. Creating a business model to absorb you know, hundreds or thousands of these aircraft. And I believe that takes time. If you look at any new aircraft technology, I was involved in marketing a regional jet, CRJ, and it took a while for that to catch on until it reached a certain critical mass. You had to explain that this wasn't simply a replacement for another aircraft, but it was stimulating in a market that may be latent or just isn't there because connectivity doesn't exist. So I think the business model is a big thing. Uber did a tremendous amount in terms of exciting people by the idea of taking all their passengers, in a sense, pointing a pipeline into the sky where those passengers would come out of vehicles and get into aircraft, and you'd have that connectivity or that feed for the air services. With Uber now, Elevate now part of Joby, it's more incumbent upon the OEMs to focus on the demand side and the market side than perhaps earlier. And they're going to have to draw on airline experience, regional airline experience, skill sets outside of the helicopter industry. But I do believe it's coming. And I think that ultimately it's going to be almost cultural. Certain markets that have the combination of the operators, the infrastructure, and the passengers will take off sooner than others. And having all three of those things available at the same time, traditionally, aviation companies don't deal with municipalities and cities. The infrastructure is already there. And so that's going to be a pacing element. There are some cities that are going to take off much faster than others.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I think what Dan said and what you said there as well is, I mean, and that's what, you know, I've only been here a year now at HAI, but I saw that maybe that was a gap area when we talk about VTOL, electric VTOL, is that it's about working together with the helicopters, not that one was replacing the other or does something better. It's that whole environment that both of you guys have talked about. And so over to Mark on that.
I think the main factor here is going to be the price function, and that has political implications. If the masses see this technology as just another toy for the elites, you can expect political opposition. And this is going to take the form of neighborhood opposition and the lengthy legal maze called the local zoning process. Hearings and lawsuits that can drag out for the better part of a decade or longer. To get this up and running, we're going to have to rely initially on the use of existing infrastructure as opposed to new build infrastructure. Aside from that, there remains a great deal of skepticism about the market for this technology, in the sense that these vehicles still need to maintain the same safety standards for other aircraft. I think the economic predictions about where the cost delta is going to go on this are wildly optimistic, in the sense that these still need to be very sophisticated aircraft, and therefore, in a society like the United States, where there's a great deal of regulatory oversight and local zoning and things like that, they're probably going to come online not last, but maybe next to last. I think we're going to see greater commercial success with this technology in more authoritarian states in the Middle East, in Asia, places like that, where there are just going to be fewer legal and political obstacles to get it going. The technology is there, obviously. The benefits of the technology can be demonstrated, obviously, but there are large political and societal obstacles to overcome, and that still needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, no, definitely good points, and that's one of the things, hopefully with the HAIs in association with the infrastructure, we've got government affairs trying to make sure that, the 50 states don't have different requirements for being able to implement this new technology and the new eVTOL vehicles. When we talk about additional infrastructure, as you're talking about, currently we can operate, try to get them to operate in the environment, the helicopter environment, but it would to maximize their effectiveness, we certainly will need the newer vertiports, and we're working with NASA and others to try to work with that. But that leads us to the next part that's tied right into that, which is the public acceptance. What are your thoughts on the community acceptance of those new vertiports in dense urban environments? And what thoughts do you have on how to ease the speed of the public acceptance? And I think, Mark, you kind of had that rolled into the last one, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add before we go to the other two.
No, it's all about price, really. I mean, the more you can get this economically downscale to people where, the middle class use it as a regular form of transportation, the better off you're going to be as far as gaining political and societal acceptance.
Dan?
Yeah, it's obviously an issue of skill. I mean, not only the per flight hour cost of these aircraft, but how many people you have access to, because the prudent thing would be to roll it out slowly. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to say, for a company to launch and say, be very specific about what they're offering. Like, you will be able to fly into JFK, and instead of taking a taxi downtown for X amount of dollars more, you'll be able to own an electric aircraft and have it fly you to Midtown Manhattan in a much shorter period of time, and there's a value proposition there. But that can't just be one person paying $5,000 for a ride to Manhattan and back. It's got to be hundreds of flights a day to make it, economical and profitable, for that matter. But there again, I mean, you mentioned the heliports. I think it's incumbent upon a lot of these manufacturers to demonstrate in the what these aircraft are going to be capable of. Includes, demonstration flights, what the flight experience is like, how much noise the aircraft make, and then I think you at least ease the acceptance of, giving access to urban areas of these aircraft. A building or a community that will not currently accept a heliport because they know what a Bell 407 sounds like, maybe more amenable to allowing a much quieter electric aircraft, land somewhere in the vicinity. And that's, it's definitely going to be a back and forth between the community and the manufacturers. But, I think once these things really reach the real world and we have a bunch flying now, it becomes a little more tangible, how accepting the regulatory and, zoning issues will be.
Okay. Ken?
Public acceptance. I think it's going to be, first of all, cultural in terms of there's certainly a difference between the US, Canada, Europe, Asia, in terms of the populations and what the residents expect of their city governments. I think that certainly, my firsthand experience in Canada, a place like Vancouver, the heliports that are used were built on the periphery. They were all built on the waterfront. They weren't built in the middle of a city, but the approaches are over water. It begs the question of pop-out floats for an Evital and investments like that. So there are ways to bring these aircraft into the urban core, but geography again is also a consideration. If you have water or bridges or other obstacles, the elapsed time benefit of using an aircraft like this is much greater than if it's simply road networks. So that's where I say it's going to be geography, and I think it's going to be cultural. But once you get some demonstration projects up and running, and you can show not just customers, but the political class and city planners what's possible, and whether this is inclusive or not in terms of noise, that's where the buy-in. So I think the demonstration projects are going to be very important. The idea of putting a multi-million-dollar building into the middle of a city as a vertiport before service is launched on a speculative sort of sense that if you build it, they will come. I think that aviation traditionally has been low risk, and operators have not spent a lot on infrastructure. They've looked to government to put in the infrastructure in some cases.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, those are all great points, and kind of growing it slowly and showing that society that it's there for them. It's not there for that special class. I think those are good points, and how it helps with the masses. So very good. Thank you. The last one we'll deal with, and before we take some questions, what are your thoughts on workforce development needs, both pilot and mechanic, as the vertical flight industry recovers from the pandemic? And I don't know, who wants to start? I'll let you guys choose.
I'll go first. If we look at pre-pandemic and we looked at the trajectory of the airline industry and business aviation, just in terms of deliveries and growth, there was a forecast, tremendous forecast of pilot shortages, to the point where regional airlines were offering incentives to helicopter pilots and military helicopter pilots to train, get their fixed wing license, and become FOs on regional aircraft, and maybe through a flow-through agreement go up to the airline. With the pandemic, airline industry has been hit really hard. It's down in some areas 90%. So it may be 3-4 years before that demand comes back, by which time you're going to have a lot more retirements. So the helicopter industry is down not as much, but I think that as people are looking at coming into this industry, probably 3-4 years, 5 years from now, there's going to be competition between what you're going to fly. It's an airline job or a helicopter job. And I think the helicopter industry has to sort of look to making it very attractive as a career option, or maybe as a stepping stone.
Dan?
Yeah, I would say that I think this entire experience probably, as UAA will do sort of in the regulatory environment, that we're realizing that the existing culture and the existing structures we have in place might not be optimal, in that, like we're doing right now. I mean, I think there is an opportunity to have more virtual remote training for things that don't require hands-on helicopter experience. There's opportunities, like the military is leaning heavily into simulator training for initial aviation school. Perhaps traveling all the way to Oregon to go to a flight academy is not feasible with your schedule or your budget, and you want to become a pilot. I mean, we might be actively learning different, if not necessarily better ways to go about the same business that would allow more people to have access to pilot training, I think.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of lessons learned that will tie into what you're saying there from the pandemic, on how everybody was just you got to do things differently. There is no solution here. Let's figure it out and move forward. Over to Mark.
I think we need a permanent infrastructure in place to handle this challenge, and the place to do that probably is at the high school level with technical high schools and aviation programs in those schools. Right now, there are roughly 18,000 public high schools in the United States. Very few have dedicated aviation programs. The New York City program is wildly successful. By some estimates, accounts for nearly 10% of the current placements, of mechanics currently today. I think no matter what, we need to have this infrastructure in place. And if the kids who graduate from that go into aviation or some kind of other technical pursuit, that's fine, but we have to have it on the ground and ready to go.
Yeah, very good point. Go ahead, Ken.
One other thing I would add is that, of course, the other thing that 5 years down the road we're going to see is the startup of the Evital industry, right? Which is also going to require pilots. And there could be various pathways for those pilots to go into Evital and then onto another aircraft in their career. The bigger issue, I think, is going to be on the maintenance side. Skilled avionics technicians probably is the most high demand or the greatest shortage across the aviation industry. And when you come out with an all-electric aircraft, electric propulsion, batteries, etc., and there's already an avionics technician shortage, you're going to need to ramp up more aviation professionals skilled in electronics.
No, absolutely, and that's what I think what Mark would agree on as well. Is the time to start doing that is now, not 5 years from now. We've got to start working on getting that training out there and what it takes to fly those aircraft. I know my team is working with Leonardo now on the 609 because of the whole powered lift certificate versus rotorcraft airplane, and those are just more and more to come as a lot of these eVTOL aircraft trying to figure out what's the best way to path to certification and the challenges they bring then for the operator. So before we go to Dan, I think number one, I'm humbly impressed with the different points of view and really glad that we did it this way with the three of you and perspectives across the industry. So thank you very much, but we're not done. Let's go over to Dan. Dan, come on.
Hi, I'm here. We do have a handful of questions. I'd like to start with one from Ali Nevzi, who is joining us from Tunisia. And he wants to know, are there plans to develop new or bigger helicopters that can be used for firefighting? Apparently, he's not a fan of Bambi buckets.
Okay.
Yeah, I can tell you, there are, at least, in California, for one, many of the large, Cal Fire, LA County Fire, are in the process of replacing their old Super Hueys and other aircraft with the S-70i Firehawk, which has been a really effective aircraft at fighting fires. There's a lot of new technological development that's going into the various components as well. Air and sky cranes, they're putting new composite rotor blades on those, which are going to improve lift. And also, I'm going to get the name of this wrong, but they're working on integrating the Sikorsky augmented pilot.
Sarah?
Yeah. The computer assisted pilot avionics suite that they put in the S92 is going to be integrated into the Ericsson Skycrane for more, pilot assisting and computer assisted aiming for water drops and everything like that. And so there's a lot of technological development, not necessarily larger, but helping the aircraft that are fighting fires do it more efficiently and safely. And also fighting for night is going to be a big thing too, with the integration of night visuals and which is, now you can fight all on the clock instead of turn, which is a big thing.
All right. Anybody else on that?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Let's see, next question. Dan mentioned some military rotorcraft that might be certified this year. Can he elaborate on some of those? Is he thinking of the aircraft proposed under the U.S. Army FARA?
FARA, no, the program is progressing, and those aircraft are currently in competition. They're still in development. So they're the two FARA aircraft, the Sikorsky Raider X and the Bell Invictus, not actually in the physical world. They're being built, but those programs are progressing. This year we should see the certification of the H-53K, the King Stallion. Sikorsky is building for the United States Marine Corps. We also have the H-860W, which is the Air Force's new search and rescue helicopter, and the MH-139, which is Air Force's UH-1N Huey replacement. Those three aircraft are nearing completion and entry to service. It's a bit different on the military side because it's not FAA certification, but those three aircraft are nearing the end of their development and will enter service this year, or should.
Okay, our next question. There's a couple of them regarding advanced air mobility. What other countries outside the US seem to be taking the lead in advanced air mobility operations, and perhaps why are they taking the lead in advanced air mobility?
Well, I think I'll speak to this. I mean, in terms of where the OEMs are located, of course, heavy concentration in the US, and then you have programs in Europe, Lilium, Volocopter, and then you also have programs in Asia, in China. One of the challenges is the certification paths are not harmonized between those three regions yet. EASA has one approach to certification, FAA has another, and perhaps in China you may see aircraft flying without what we would call certification from a Western perspective. So that's where a lot of the development is, but it is picking up in other areas as well. Embraer is involved, Korea is involved, Hyundai. In terms of applications, what's interesting, if you look at the larger context of electric aviation, beyond rotorcraft, Scandinavia is certainly taking a major lead with mandating that flights under 90 minutes will be electric by 2040, and Norway is embracing that, and Norway is a major oil producer. So you may find that in certain areas, it's actually the environmental aspect that's driving early adoption of some of this AAM activity.
Okay, Ken, since you brought up Scandinavia and a particular year, this was actually the follow-up question. Best guess, when will civilian passengers ride in a pilotless aircraft? Would you, any of you guys want to take a ride tomorrow?
I think you're going to need, well, there's mixed messages out there from the different manufacturers, and that's one of the challenges. You have EHang, doing tourist flights. You have Wisk, which is Boeing and Kitty Hawk, a joint venture, saying that they're going to bypass piloted and go directly to autonomous. And then you have others who are saying, we want to accumulate millions of hours of flight data and gradually go from somewhat automated to more automated aircraft. And then only when the data is there and the regulatory authorities find it acceptable, go to full autonomy, and that would be, maybe a 10-year process or longer. So I would weigh more on the longer term. I think we're going to need pilots for a long time to come.
Yeah, well, I'd add, I think, to borrow a term of art from Sikorsky, that you're going to see a lot of optimally piloted aircraft. So basically, the technology is going to begin to relieve more and more of the tasks from the pilot and automate them, not necessarily flight critical tasks, but planning, system monitoring, that thing, obstacle avoidance. So AI will sort of, and autopilots will sort of move the tasks of being the burden of a pilot less and less. And then down the road, what you end is an app that you have the option of handing the command of over to some sort of a computer. But that, I think, like Ken said, that's going to be baby steps all the way there. It's not something that we're not going to be flying in robots tomorrow.
Okay, we'll welcome back Gabriel Amato, who has a question for us. Do you think it would be a good investment by the private sector to build VTOL infrastructure? And I assume he means the eVTOL infrastructure.
I'll take that. I don't think you're going to attract a lot of private sector investment for that until the actual aircraft themselves are certified and the requirements of the aircraft are known. Also, you're going to want to be able to mitigate the political risk and handle whatever zoning hurdles you have to jump through. And perhaps, you know, like there are standards for conventional heliports, there'd be standards for these new eVTOL heliports as well. I think then the tap will really turn on. Obviously, you'll have some enthusiasts before then, you know, like Mr. Perot, who wants to invest his company's capital in this kind of thing by making existing heliports eVTOL friendly. But until those other things are handled, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of private capital pouring into it.
He did have a follow-up to that, and he said, besides the metropolitan areas like LA, New York City, et cetera, do you foresee or believe that islands in the Caribbean would be a location to see a boom of VTOL aircraft hopping from island to island?
I think it's going to be a function of stage length. You know, it's like a payload range. And if you look at the Caribbean, I mean, what are the incumbent aircraft right now? You might have an Islander or a Twin Otter on a short haul route going into a small little airport. And then if you look elsewhere, you'll have Twin Otters, you have Dash 8s and ATR 42s, turboprops flying longer segments. There's a lot of baggage that's also carried on those aircraft. It's passengers and bags because it's food, whatever. So it's going to be the very short. And I think you're going to see fixed wing electric in those markets long before you see the VTOL. The VTOL might be to the place that don't have the airports and don't have the service.
Another problem in that area of the world is the robustness and reliability of the local power grid, as anyone who's ever spent any time in Puerto Rico can attest to. Those problems need to be addressed as well. If you're going to maintain any kind of a flight schedule and you don't have a reliable source of electric power, you're kind of in trouble.
Okay, let's wrap it up with one last question. This is kind of a wish list for you, almost. What are some of the gaps that you would like to see closed in rotorcraft fleet, or what aircraft would you like to see developed? Dan, let's start with you. You had a wide out. I guess we lost Dan. Mark, how about you?
I'm here. Sorry.
No, no worries.
Can I say the Millennium Falcon, or is that it's vertical takeoff and lift? No, I mean, I'll say, so in my day job is editing Valor magazine, and I deal a lot with the military and parapublic side of the house. And you mentioned FARA, and I'll just say, for me, the FARA and the FLRA, I don't know why they chose these very similar acronyms, but it's the Army. But it's basically the Black Hawk replacement and then a replacement for the OH-58D Kiowa Warrior in the scout recon role. And seeing the investment that the Army is making in those programs and the development efforts that Bell, Sikorsky, and Boeing are pouring into those, and the companies that didn't make it, AVX and I can't name them all. Anyway, I mean, it's a really impressive technological endeavor that the government is undertaking, and the Army finally is at a place where it is going to get new revolutionary aircraft, and it's just really cool to follow along with. And I think the commercial sector also is going to probably benefit from a lot of the component technologies that come out of that those programs, which is, it's going to be really fun to continue to follow into the future.
Ken, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that sort of interests me is that middle ground between existing helicopters and the Evital. And I've heard two different things from OEMs, right? Bell has an aircraft 429 with 4 electric fans as an alternate to a traditional tail rotor, right? They haven't really talked about how loud that aircraft is. I mean, there are some technical papers out there, but the fact that they're exploring it. And then Airbus, on the technology side, has talked about having an electric motor as part of the emergency powertrain, where if you were to lose your engine, you would be able to, with battery power, to safely auto-rotate or fly a certain distance with electric power and enhance the safety of the existing helicopter. So both those things are very interesting. The other thing, of course, that's very desirable is if we can push the cost of training helicopters down so that learning to fly a helicopter is much more affordable. I think that's a huge barrier for a lot of people in terms of investing in this industry and getting a payback. So if there's a way, even with something hybrid, to lower the cost of training helicopters, that also would be a great benefit.
It does appear we lost Mark. Jim, is there anything you're looking forward to in terms of closing that gap, or aircraft you'd like to see?
No, I think nothing special out there. I think, the ability to hover is always been one of the things. I own an airplane and have access to a helicopter, but I always choose the helicopter because I love to be able to hover and I love to be able to go where airplanes can't go. And that's where we talked about some of the infrastructure before. So, future aircraft that do it more efficiently and quieter. I mean, all the things that we have to progress to, because that's just normal progression. You got to keep getting better. You got to keep getting safer. And so I look forward to flying some of the new vehicles out there. So nothing special, but thanks, Dan.
Okay, let me bring my camera up. There we go. I do appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. Jim, Ken, Dan, and of course, Mark as well. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your contributions to the industry. Thank you for telling us what you're seeing as an overall view of where the industry has been and where we're going to be going in this next year. It's going to be, we're off to a rocky start. It's got to smooth out at some point. So it's going to be fascinating to see where we end up.
Just a little bit of turbulence. We've still got our flight plan filed and we'll get back on track. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Back to you, Dan.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay, coming up in the next couple of weeks, save the date for our HAI at Work webinars. Next week, we have off-airport landings, managing risks using Bowtie. And then on January 28th, we have an HAI Heli Expo preview. That's going to be a loaded episode, let me tell you. We've got a bunch of stuff to talk about coming up for the Heli Expo show in New Orleans. And then on February 4th, we have an update by ATEC, Part 147 update. And it's going to deal with the congressional mandate to align with align with airman certification standards that Congress produced. Coming up very shortly, you will receive a questionnaire. We do ask that you take the time to fill it out. We do use the information you've provided in those questionnaires to plan for future webinars. We are grateful for any input you can give us. As always, we really want to know what HAI can do for you. Let us know good, the bad, the different. Best way to do it is contact through email at president@rotor.org. Jim sees all of those emails that come in, and he does assign our employees to follow up with them. So until next week, we do ask that you be safe, that you fly safe, and we'll see you next Thursday.